All right, Dr. Maroon, welcome to Making Pittsburgh Healthy. I am so excited to have you on the show. Tell us and the listeners a little bit about yourself, what you like to do for fun, and what gets you up in the morning.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a real pleasure to join you here today. I'm a neurosurgeon at the University of Pittsburgh. I've been here forever, it seems, and I've been very interested in alternative aspects of medicine as well as neurosurgery. And as a neurosurgeon, uh, I have taken care of patients with various types of traumatic brain injury, brain tumors, aneurysms, ruptured discs, lumbar spinal stenosis that you deal a lot with, and other diseases of the brain and spinal areas. But I've also had a strong interest in holistic approaches to medicine, using natural approaches, particularly physical activity, exercise, nutrition, supplements, to maintain what we call homeostasis or balance in our lives, and also spirituality and strong family social relationships. So all of these are factors that I've attempted to uh, introduce in my own life, my patients' lives, and continue to practice and enjoy what I do.
Well, I love your take on things, and we're going to dive into the health aspects, but you didn't start off that way. You were doing surgery, brain surgery, and then I think the bottom dropped out and you hit rock bottom, which seems to have been the turnaround for your whole career and your whole life. What happened many years ago?
Uh, a good question. And neurosurgery is 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 6 or 7 years of postgraduate training, and you get pretty conditioned in a program like that, finishing at age 28, 29, 30, depending on various factors. You get out and with all that training, you want to be in quotes successful. And everybody in their own profession strives to do well, to be successful. When I came to the University of Pittsburgh quite a few years ago, I was on a track. I wanted to be like you and many others. I wanted to be the very best that I could. And I wanted to achieve success. And I put success in quotes. So, what do we mean by success? Recognition, financial resources, uh, some degree of status, the amulets of success, as I call them. And I had accumulated those pretty well by the time I got into my 40s. And then the bottom, as you said, dropped out. My father died prematurely at age 60 of a heart attack. My wife left for good reasons with our two children in the middle of winter, actually, much like a day like today in February. And I had to quit neurosurgery all the same week. I no longer, because of anxiety, depression, felt safe operating. And I moved in with my mother in Wheeling, West Virginia, a dilapidated truck stop that was bequeathed to her by my father, heavily mortgaged, and literally for a year filled up 18 wheelers and flipped hamburgers, and wondering what in the world happened. How did this happen to me? Today, we would call this burnout. So, what is burnout? Overworked, overcommitted, overstressed, and exhausted, physical, mental exhaustion. But I was successful. I had the amulets of success, but I neglected my family. I neglected spirituality, and I was 10 pounds, 15 pounds overweight. I had no concern or I didn't pay attention to my physical fitness. So the question is, how does one come out of a hole like this?
Mm.
And there's a saying that every man's life is a diary in which he means to write one story but writes another. His humblest time is when he compares the story as it is with what he vowed to make it. And when I woke up in this farmhouse next to a truck stop in Wheeling, West Virginia, that was not what I vowed to make of my life. And yet I was such in a major depression that I had no idea how to get out of this very deep, dark, self-destructive thoughts hole. And I think for your audience, the message that I can convey is the most important things in life. And I actually put it down in a book form entitled Square One, A Simple Guide to a Balanced Life. So while involved with psychotherapy, involved with antidepressives, none of these really worked. So what works in a case like this? For myself, it was a serendipitous phone call from the banker who held the mortgage on the truck stop. And he said, "Hey, Joe, let's go for a run. It's a spring day and we should get out." And I think in his mind, he wanted to see if I'd be around long enough to pay off the mortgage. You know, I'm not sure how much with pure friendship, or am I going to survive long enough to pay his money back? But the point is, we went down to the Philadelphia, West Virginia high school football track, and I made it around 4 times. Barely. I was exhausted. I ached, and I said, never again. But that night, Aaron, something very, very interesting happened. I slept for the first time in about 4 months.
Wow.
A little light went off. I went down the next day and I did 1.25 miles, and then 1.5 miles, then 2, 3, 4. And as the unintended side effect of physical activity, I was resetting my neurochemical balance in my brain. I was elevating my serotonin levels naturally without drugs. I was releasing dopamine and endocannabinoids, which made me feel better. I gravitated to a much healthier diet than truck stop food. I started getting into supplements for the deficiencies that I had. And then I picked up a Bible that I hadn't read in an awful long time since my Sisters of Charity upbringing in high school and grade school, and got back into the spiritual aspect of life, reconnected with my family, and after a year was able to get back to the most productive time of my life. So from the very nadir, the bottom, because of physical activity, because of spirituality, because of friends, diet, exercise, it led me to write the book Square One, A Simple Guide to a Balanced Life. And what I want everyone listening to this right now to do in their mind is to draw a square. On the top, put work. On the right side, put family and social. On the bottom, write spiritual. And on the left, physical. Now, draw a square in your mind, making each line commensurate with how much effort you put on each one of these each day. When I did that, my work line was like a flat line EKG. There was no family, no spiritual, and no physical. That's the definition of burnout.
Mm.
So the physical got my body, my mind body connection back to the point where I could think about family and social aspects. And the spirituality is something that really should pervade everything we do. So what do we mean by spirituality? It's our purpose in life, what really we truly are made up of and believe in. And it's learning about giving of yourself. There's a saying that we give but little when we give of our possessions. It's when we give of ourselves that we truly give. And it's the paradox. When you give, you receive much more in abundance. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it's written, cast thy bread upon the waters, and after many days it shall be returned unto you. So often in your life, I'm sure, Aaron, and in mine, we've done things, oh, I don't want to do that, I'm reluctant, or I'm reaching out to help somebody, why am I doing this? But it always comes back manyfold.
Right.
So anyway, that's basically the story. But I guess there's a little bit more. I learned to bike. I was running, and then I read about triathlons at that point and cross training, basically. So I wanted to cross train. I got a bike. I learned to swim. I hadn't really learned to swim before. And I started entering into triathlons. Won a Tin Man race, a 300-meter swim, 10-mile bike, and 5K run. But doing that and finishing it, it was like Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile where I was.
Right.
But I continued to add on until the point where I've done 8 Ironman triathlons and 5 in Kona, which is the International World Championship, for a 2.4 mile swim, 112 bike, and a marathon. So that run, the point is not to boast, but that run around the high school track many years ago started me on a journey that led to physical fitness, mental alertness, and also physical health. So that's a quick summary.
Well, I love that story. When I first heard that, it blew my mind that in 1 week you're doing surgery on a brain, and the next week you're flipping burgers at a truck stop. So I think we can all hit that rock bottom. And this is what I love about our show is people can relate to this in every aspect. I think we all hit a bottom. It's let's just not stay there. And that gift of the financial banker was a gift from God that said, let's get his butt out there and go for a run. It won't kill him. He'll think it does. But what a journey. And you weren't boastful. The 8 Ironman, incredible. I believe you've ran over 70 Olympic distance triathlons, 9 marathons. I mean, you have just turned that 1 mile into a lifetime of success and healing. And you mentioned something too, that the spiritual side, when you exercise, I love this about exercise. I've always been an athlete and I've always exercised. You turn on your spiritual side. You open up other avenues that I think are inside of us in our mind that are suppressed if we're not moving. And then it ties into, well, you want to eat healthy, ties into supplements and so forth. That's an incredible story. And we are going to have your Square One book, and this is going to be a giveaway this week. This is going to be in our show notes, but really a practical way of living. I love it. It doesn't, do you think health is complicated?
You remember Chuck Noll?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Chuck Noll was the Super Bowl coach times 4 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he actually asked me to become part of the Steelers in terms of a neurosurgical consultant 30 years ago, or so, thereabouts, I guess. Goes very quickly. But Chuck Noll frequently would say, football is not complicated. I mean, when you look at TV and they describe the ins and outs and all of the play, you know, who could understand that? He said, it's not complicated. He said, football is about blocking and tackling. And as he said, whoever blocks and tackles the best wins the game. And your question reminded me of that in the sense that when you really boil it down, life and health is not that complicated.
Right.
It's about the things that I said. Life is about work, family, spirituality, and physicality. Those are the 4 main aspects that we deal with every day. And putting those together in the right way will lead to a relatively healthy and successful life generally. Now, that brings up another discussion point of the science of epigenetics. And epigenetics, as this audience knows, our genes are located on our chromosomes and they do nothing until they're acted upon.
Mm.
So when they're acted upon, then they make over 100,000 different proteins, all with different characteristics, as you know.
Right.
So what are the factors that tell the genes what to do? These are called epigenetic factors above the genes. Diet, exercise, environmental factors, and stress. These are 4 epigenetic factors that tell your genes whether to make inflammatory agents or anti-inflammatory. So what's the common cause of cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, MS? Inflammation.
Right.
So if we eat a Big Mac infused with antibiotics and hormones, fed corn sprayed with glyphosate or Roundup, and then wash it down with a bottle of phosphoric acid, which is Coke, and then have an order of trans fatty acids with your French fries, these things are going to tell your genes to make inflammatory agents that clog up your blood vessels, affect your brain with amyloid deposition, and your joints and everything else, as contrasted with a Mediterranean diet, fruits, vegetables, legumes, and lean protein, etc., which makes anti-inflammatory agents to reduce the incidence of that. So 70% of the diseases of aging that we get are epigenetically determined. 20 to 30% we don't have much control of. It's in our genes. I used to think it was 100%. My father died at 60. I thought any year beyond 60 for me was a bonus year. You know, I've now surpassed that by 2 decades. And thank God I'm still competing and still functioning at what I think is a good level. So those 4 epigenetic factors are all choices. Diet, what we ingest, and supplements we'll talk about. Exercise, whether we get off the couch or not. Environmental factors, whether we smoke, drink, use drugs, air, water, and whether we control stress. Stress is uncontrolled stress is a very neurotoxic element. When you're under stress, you release, as you know, through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, cortisol. Cortisol destroys brain cells in your hippocampus. So people who are under chronic stress actually lose their memory. They have difficulty processing information because stress affects the cells in the hippocampus, which is the repository of memory in our brain. So that's a long way of saying we have control over epigenetic factors, and the genetic factors, 20 to 30%, we just have to deal with when it happens.
Right. And I've even seen studies that it may be even over 90%,
Yeah.
Or less than 10% is genetic. My father died when I was in Slippery Rock studying health and phys ed of a heart attack at age 50.
Wow.
And I vowed at that point, I am not going down this path. I didn't know what I was going to completely do. I didn't understand chiropractic and nerve system till years later. But I made a stand then that said, I'm not going to let this happen to me, which and this is probably what started you on this path is you went and exercised, you slept, you felt better, and you got intrigued to say, you know what, there could be more of this. What do I need to do? Well, I went on to study it, and I tell my patients all the time, the sympathetic nerve system, the stress part, the fight and flight is always there. We need to get our habits that we need to stimulate our parasympathetic or calming. And that's exactly what you're talking about. The lifestyle changes and choices we make control our outcome. It's not just how our parents were. And that's tremendous, because many of us just buy into, well, it's just the way it is, doc. It's like, it's not the way it is. It's a way, what you're allowing, change it. Let's dive in a little bit with, I'm 55. I still play rugby, which I've had a lot of head injuries. I'm trying to get very wise in my later years because I have to play with younger people, 20 and 30-year-olds, to not hit my head. But I've had some injuries, and I think this is more common than we understand. And what you were talking about with the epigenetics, our brain has an ability to regenerate and heal if we've had these injuries. But let me just give you my latest. Over 5 years ago, I wrecked my bicycle going about 30 miles an hour down a hill. And as I turned my head, I hit the right side of my helmet, cracked my helmet in half, and broke my scapula. Well, in the hospital, I got tested for my scapula, and it was fractured. But they never tested my brain because I wasn't showing any signs of that. It wasn't until about a year later that I found myself in a semi-depressed state. Not always. I would go through these waves of, I would feel like, what am I here for? Why? I am no good. I'm better off if I wasn't even here. Then a few days later, I would feel on top of the world again. And I kept trying to relate this to my wife. And it wasn't until I started to discover it was probably an injury to my brain that had set this up, and my hormones. But I think what kept me going so well, and I want to just ask you this process of people in sports, what's the recommendations to prepare for this, to deal with it if it happens, and then if it's been a long-term injury, how do we recover? I think I stayed in my game because I've kept my alignment of my spine. I exercise all the time. I eat a very clean, healthy, organic diet. I take supplements, a lot of fish oil, MCT, high fats. I do intermittent fasting. My mind, I train my mind and my spiritual time. So I did a lot of factors, but it still hit me. And I know you set the stage in the NFL for the Concussion Protocol back in the 90s, again with Chuck Noll. How prevalent is this, and what do we need to be aware of with the healing factors? Not so much, okay, I have a concussion, let me sit out for a week, but what do we need to do to prepare ourselves if we have it, and then how to recover through this?
Well, it's a broad question, and there are two aspects of it. Number one, how can we prevent it? So I think, and you mentioned the impact test. Several years ago, I told Coach Knoll that Bobby Brister, the starting quarterback, couldn't play the next week against the Dallas Cowboys. He said, "Why not?" I said, "Because he's had a concussion, and the guidelines say he must stay out a minimum of 2 weeks." And he said, "Well, why not 1 week? Why not 3 weeks? Why 2 weeks? And what data is there to really support what you're saying, Maroon?" He was very challenging. And I was upset. Who's he to talk to me about that? But he was right. So I contacted Dr. Mark Lovell, a neuropsychologist that I was working with at the time at Allegheny General. And we devised the impact test, which is a 20-minute neurocognitive test. It's now available for kids under 12, a simple computer-based test that assesses your memory, your ability to process information, and other factors. And it's become the standard of care as a baseline in the NFL, Major League Baseball, car racing, and we've tested 20 million tests over the last 20 years. So it's a baseline. Every kid should have a baseline neurocognitive test before getting on a swing, a bicycle, or any sport, particularly contact sports, so that if you do have a problem like you did, you're able to go back, take the test, and you can actually objectively document where the problem is. At UPMC, Dr. Mickey Collins is now the head of the Concussion Center. We see 10 million individuals with concussions a year. 7 neuropsychologists who do nothing but examine concussion patients. And Dr. Contos, Anthony Contos, his associate, and Mickey have devised a program for rehabilitation that is, I think, probably among the best in the country in terms of, so what happens in a concussion? There are different forms of concussion. You may have just unsteadiness, a vestibular ocular problem. You may have migraine headaches post-concussion. You may have neurocognitive problems where difficulty in processing information and memory. You may have cervical issues. All of these fall under the rubric of a concussion. It's, when in the past, we were taught a concussion is when you get knocked out. Well, 90% of concussions are not associated with loss of consciousness, right, which is what happened to you. Now, the post-concussion syndrome usually is a syndrome that occurs really within the context, time-wise, of the head injury. This is associated with memory problems, maybe mood issues, maybe disinhibition, headache, lethargy, and photophobia, difficulty with lights. And these is a whole spectrum of symptoms associated with post-concussion syndrome. What you're describing a year later, without any intervening symptoms, I'm not sure I can relate this to your concussion. I don't know what else was going on in your life at that time, but to say that it was due to that, it's a little of a stretch in my mind hearing your story. That's not to say that it isn't or you didn't have problems. So what do you do once you do have this post-concussion syndrome? Well, I think it gets back really again to the square. We used to do what was cocoon therapy. We would tell people if they have a concussion, go to a quiet room, no TV, no screens, wait till the brain heals itself. And we now know that that's not the best treatment. physical activity beginning at a slow pace early on is therapeutic, as long as you're not reproducing or aggravating the underlying symptoms of the post-concussion syndrome. So number one, physical activity. Number two is defining the specific type of headache, correction, the specific type of concussion you have. Is it the migraine? Is it the cognitive? Is it the vestibular ocular? Is it the cervical? Put it in the, and once you define the type of concussion, then there are specific therapeutic approaches to that the Concussion Center at UPMC now puts patients into those specific formats. And then in addition, I feel that adequate vitamin D3, adequate magnesium, resveratrol, which is a natural antioxidant, and omega-3 fatty acids are all potentially therapeutic and helpful. And when it really becomes intractable, I've found that hyperbaric oxygen therapy is a very reasonable consideration. The Veterans Administration now has initiated a national study looking at this for veterans with PTSD as well as post-concussion syndrome. And there are multiple papers supporting the role of that in post-concussion syndrome. So that's the whole spectrum for you that we can dissect further if you'd like.
Well, let me ask you from a more of a general statement. People that are playing sports, they have their kids playing sports, the parents are playing some sports. What supplements or nutrients would benefit just the general population? And these are things I tell my patients. I mean, there's things that we should be on all the time. We should eat a very clean diet, get physical activity, take some standard supplements. What would you say those standard supplements are? I think the general population is missing out on this, or they get a very inefficient supplement from it's not a healthy, clean supplement from a general store, the supermarket or whatever. What would you say is a baseline that we should be at least supporting?
Well, I think it begins with a healthy diet.
Right.
Adequate greens, vegetables, fruits, and protein.
Yeah, I agree. And I always tell my patients, you can't supplement an unhealthy diet. You can't, if you're eating McDonald's, you can't take D3 and omega and think you're okay. So I know you.
So it begins with that. And if you're really, really in a very healthy diet, then there are biomarkers you can use for some things, like D3.
Mm-hmm.
You can draw when you go to the doctor, you get a D3 level, and you're 30, 40, 50. If you're under 30, you really need to get more sunshine or take D3. You're optimally in the 50 to 70 range for vitamin D3. So you can measure it and you know how much to take. It's very important. It's an immunomodulating vitamin, the sunshine vitamin, and that magnesium, particularly in sports with a lot of sweating and exercise. Magnesium can get easily depleted. It's involved in over 300 chemical reactions in our body, and it is a very important thing. Curcumin or turmeric is another natural anti-inflammatory that I feel is reasonable and I take, and also omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil.
Right.
And you need to get. There's a lot of. The important thing about fish oil is if it sits on a shelf too long, it oxidizes, or if it's exposed to air, it oxidizes. That means it becomes rancid. So fish oil can be deleterious if you don't have it fresh and take it and keep it from air. But it's a potent, again, anti-inflammatory. I also particularly for its analgesic and anti-inflammatory effect, use CBD, cannabidiol. And as we talked earlier, I'm associated with a company called CV Sciences in San Diego that has, I think, one of the very best CBD products, cannabidiol, derived from hemp, not a marijuana product, and it's an analgesic, anti-inflammatory, and anxiolytic, meaning it reduces anxiety. And it's been very effective in patients that I've seen for sleep, to help with sleep, like melatonin. CBD is another hypnotic, or not a hypnotic, but it aids with sleep. Jeff Bose, my associate, and I wrote a paper on CBD. If you Google my name and cannabidiol and the applications of cannabis, it's a paper that can, it's a good overview summary, I think. So that those are some of the products that I would suggest considering.
And I agree. I love those. I take most of those myself on a daily basis. And I think that's one of the reasons when I had my injury, I healed so well and I didn't have a lot of symptoms. I look at my body and I think I want to continue healing because we know the brain can regenerate. So I'm always looking into what can I do more. I remember back in 1991, I believe, I was at chiropractic college. We had a tournament in Saranac Lake, New York. I got pulled to the ground backwards, hit the back of my head, got knocked out for a split second. I got up. We had 10 minutes left in the game. I jogged back we scored on the play. So I jogged back to set up a kickoff. And I remember that everything was spinning. And then I woke up 10 minutes later in the end zone. The game was over. And I looked at my buddy and he goes, "Oh, you're back." I played 10 minutes and I don't remember anything, which just blows me away. Going back to the CBD, do you believe this is the new, like maybe the hottest thing we've seen in nutritional supplementation, that it's really taking hold? And I think the listeners have to understand, you can't just go to the gas station and get a quality CBD product. It has to be, and that's where Dr. Maroon's on a company called CV Sciences, very high and clean producing. It's a quality product. Do you think that this is going to be the next thing, like fish oil, that we should all be taking because our system is set up and designed to have this?
Well, obviously a very good question. And there are over 1,500 purveyors of CBD now. You look at the newspaper every day, in the Pittsburgh paper, there's a huge ad, CBD oil. Of those 1,500, there's probably 5 or a handful that are generally recognized as safe by the government, that knows that inspects the cultivars, which are the seeds from which the hemp is grown, does tests for insecticides and pesticides and heavy metals. Hemp, which is the product from which CBD is made, absorbs heavy metals from the soil and air. And this needs to be tested. And then how it's encapsulated. All of these are steps that can be shortcutted and have a really inferior product that really, and also doesn't, either too much or too little, doesn't deliver what it says in the capsule. So there are a few companies, CV Sciences, the one I'm most familiar with, touches all these bases. You can go online and see the analytical tests that are done on each batch. And, it's a product that I take myself and I use on patients for pain relief, or analgesia as an anti-inflammatory, and as I said, to help settle down anxiety. And ibuprofen, Advil, is a drug that's associated with 16,000 deaths a year from gastrointestinal hemorrhage, over 100,000 hospitalizations from ibuprofen because of gastric problems. I'm always looking for, and why do people take it? It's an anti-inflammatory, it reduces inflammation. So that's how I got interested in omega-3 fatty acids or fish oil. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. Curcumin or turmeric, a natural anti-inflammatory. CBD, a natural anti-inflammatory. And what's the cause of cancer, heart disease, stroke, and Alzheimer's? Inflammation. So I'm with you, Aaron. Whatever we can do, an anti-inflammatory diet and subjects like we're talking about as anti-inflammatories to reduce the inflammatory process in our body will help us live, hopefully, healthier and longer. We're all, no one's going to get out of here alive. And, I used to say, my goal is to die young as late as possible. And that's, implying that it's the quality of our lives that really matters.
Right.
And so what you and I are talking about and share with our patients is our own experiences with how to maintain the highest quality. I
Right.
want to perform at a high level. I want to be a high performance athlete, surgeon, whatever I do, to the best of my abilities. And to optimize that, diet, exercise, and control stress and avoid environmental toxins. Chuck Knowles, it ain't complicated, but it takes commitment and willpower and desire. And what I find both you and I doing is trying to motivate people through cognitive awareness. So, my story, again, humbling, not to boast, but I found a pathway that worked for me to get me back into peak performance. And what I'm suggesting to your listeners, I did it through physical activity. Some people control stress and adversity with meditation or prayer. Others look to family support, friends support. All of these are important. But it's like the Buddhists say, you must be mindful and aware of where you are and what you're doing in your daily life. You must live in the daytime compartments, knowing and what's your purpose? What's it all about, Alfie? What am I doing this for? Where am I going with my life and with what I'm doing? That's spirituality in a broad sense. So that, what we're doing is we're sharing our personal experiences with the hope that we can motivate somebody to get out and take that walk around the track or the block. You don't have to be a triathlete and you don't have to play rugby, but do something that makes you move so that you get the aerobic conditioning, some resistance exercises to avoid sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass as you get older, and such as that. So, we're on the same wavelength, so to speak, in what we're trying to accomplish, which is to motivate individuals to do what's best for themselves.
Right. And you look very young, you look healthy, you're vibrant, your skin, just everything about you is anti-aging, youthfulness, you're doing what you're teaching. And that's why when my patients say, "Why do you still play rugby?" Like, well, I can, and I like to have a platform to say, I'm not going to tell you to do something unless I'm doing it myself. If I believe in it, I'm going to do it. And it's interesting. I read Rocky Blyer's book back in elementary school when he got injured and his leg got, shrapnel in it and half blown up. He came back to play and, was a running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers and gained 1,000 yards. Well, I think a couple seasons. Well, I remember reading his book as a kid and I got inspired. And I thought I can do great things. And I think that, and this is my hope for people listening, is they hear your story and they may be at that truck stop right now thinking, am I ever going to get out of this, whatever that truck stop for them is? And there's hope. God created us for amazing things. And when we live on purpose, and what you're saying is when you put the square into play and you get your body balance, and you actually work at it, because this takes work to get up and exercise, to perform Ironmans is not I'm going to work out for 15 minutes a day. It takes up part of your life and you have to be dedicated, but we get the return. And that is incredible. And my prayer is that people do hear this and they get inspired and one more person changes. Let me ask you this, Dr. Maroon, when was your last Ironman? I know this wasn't too long ago, correct?
Well, my last Ironman was about 4 years ago, but my last triathlon Olympic distance race was last fall.
Incredible.
And, I'm proud to say that I came in first in my age group, Columbus, Ohio. But I have to be honest and say I was the only one in my age group. So I joke, Aaron, that I used to say I'm in the fourth quarter, and I no longer say that. I'm now in overtime. And I know it. And I guess that's why we know not the day nor the hour, but we know that bullet that goes by someday is going to hit. And I know that. And I think of the words of the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas,
mm-hmm.
when he said, "Do not go gently into that good night. Old age should raise at closing day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light." So I guess as long as I have some degree of vitality, I want to maintain the bright light as long as I can. And again, there's no other goal for me talking to you except hopefully someone may take a little motivation or a little information that they can apply to their own lives and enhance their own peak performance.
Well, and it shows your heart and your purpose and how big of a man you are, because you're very busy. At this point in your life, you don't have to do these interviews, but you agreed to do it. I was like a little kid. I'm just so excited to talk to you because being the local neurosurgeon for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which we all know is the dynasty, and we hope they can continue. But you do it because you have a purpose and your heart is big. And just like that gentleman who took you for a run, changed your life. Somebody listening to this podcast, it can change your life. And please, folks, share these episodes with people, spread this around the world, because there are going to be people, Dr. Maroon, that hear this story, look themselves in the mirror and say, you know what, if he can do it, I can do it. And whatever spark that is, that's the spark of life. And the Making Pittsburgh Healthy, when I put this together, I said, I want to make Pittsburgh the healthiest city in America. And as I do, Pittsburgh is not in the top 50. I think it's around 78th or so. So I'm looking to try to spark this city, and I think we're doing a good job. I think the city of Pittsburgh is doing a good job. We're making some very good changes, but across the world, if we do this universal and we apply these principles, we're all going to be healthier. And I say that, my goal is to live to 120, whether I do or not. But I said I'm gonna, well, however long I get, there's not going to be diapers in my life. I'm not going to have diapers on, and I'm still going to be driving. I don't know how long I'm going to play rugby, but I'm going to be active. And I really appreciate you being on, and we'll have all your contact information, your book. If you would like a copy of this book, we'll have the link on our show notes. Just click and we'll take you right to it. And again, we're going to raffle one of these books off. This will be in the show notes and on how to get entered in for the raffle. But Dr. Maroon, thank you. I so appreciate you doing this for us. Any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, it's a great thing that you're doing. And as you said, it's by example that we teach sometimes, your example and what's happened to us. And also we learn from adversity. Although that truck stop experience was the worst thing in my life, it changed me, made me much more appreciative of what I have and what I can do. And so it's gratitude and kindness that comes from adversity sometimes,
Right.
other times anger and resentment. But there are positive things that comes from it. And all of this is pretty well summarized in my book, and your audience can go to maroonsquare1.com. And it's something that encapsulates much of what we said today. I appreciate the opportunity. Keep up your good work too, Aaron. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maroon.